Good morning to my unseen audience. Wherever this finds you, I hope you are well. We're here in central Missouri where it's the day in between two major snowstorms. And so, of course, at such times, all of us here begin thinking about warmer places, about being snowbirds, about drifting off into a Jimmy Buffett song and find our way at a beach somewhere in Florida. So what I'm going to do is tell you a few stories about what I do here at William Woods University, and then also about the importance of travel. I direct a Center for Ethics and Global Studies here on campus, and if I haven't said my name yet, my name is Travis Tamerius. And as part of the program that I oversee, I'm privileged to be able to travel with faculty, staff, and students to different places in the world. We started this program back in 2006. And the first country and culture that we looked at was Kenya. Unfortunately, we were not able to take that particular trip as the State Department issued a travel advisory just a few weeks before we made our departure. So we had to call off that trip, and students from that class, they were able to then travel to different places in the world. But the following year was the first trip that we took in this organized program called Woods Around the World. We went to Peru, and Peru is home to the former Incan Empire, and it's also home to one of the most impressive sights to see in the world, a place called Machu Picchu. They're high up in the Andes Mountains. And Machu Picchu was made known to the outside world back in 1911 with a Yale University professor, a man named Hiram Bingham, who came upon this the citadel of the Incan Empire high up in the Andes Mountains. It's a remarkable story, and he had paid a Peruvian boy to take him up to find these ruins. His search party had already grown tired of looking for all these sites, and so they told Hiram Bingham, said, "We'll meet you at the base of the camp." And so he went up with this little boy, and he found this city that had sort of been lost to history. In fact, the Spanish had never found it when they were pillaging the land and traveling all over the Incan Empire. So we made a trip there, took a group of students, and we went to Lima, Peru, and then into Cusco, and eventually we made our way to Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was just voted as one of the 7 new wonders of the world. And so if you get an opportunity in life, find your way down to that great landscape, and you will not regret what you see. Beautiful place to discover and to spend some time around. One of the things that I like about all the trips is that every time we travel, we have a student who has never been on a plane, and sometimes a student who's never seen the ocean. And so on that particular trip in Peru, we had a student from Bowling Green, Missouri, who was able to, we flew to Newark, New Jersey, we flew down the Atlantic seaboard, and by the time we got off the plane, we ended up in the Pacific in Lima, Peru. So he saw 2 oceans in one day, and he said that night, he said, "Hey, do you want to go down with me? And the following morning, you want to wake up and walk with me down to the ocean to see it?" And so we arose early and crossed that off his bucket list. So that was the first trip we actually made. The next year we did a domestic trip, and we did the American Civil Rights Trail. And that trip coincided with the 50th anniversary of a man who wrote a book called Black Like Me. He was a white journalist, and he was wanting to understand the experience of African Americans living in deep in the South, and so he was able to darken his skin with an artificial pigmentation, and he lived for a year as a black man in the South, and he wanted to see if he would be treated differently. And so in commemoration of that historic event, we decided to make our own trip into the American South, and we went to 5 cities. We worshiped at Martin Luther King's church in Atlanta, Georgia. We also were able to sit down with a man named Lonnie King, who is one of the lions of the Civil Rights Movement. He's no relationship to Martin Luther King, even though they share the same last name, but they were very, very close friends. And Lonnie King was instrumental in the student protest in the 1960s, and he got Martin Luther King on board to help in those student demonstrations. And so we spent 4 hours talking to him. We also went to Montgomery, Alabama, where Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. And we also traveled to a small Selma, Alabama, which was the site of Sunday, Bloody Sunday. We spent a day with Joanne Bland, who has the distinction of being the youngest girl to be arrested during the Civil Rights Movement. She was arrested as a small child and spent some time in jail, but was a wonderful storyteller and gave us a walking tour of that important march in American history. The following year, we made another overseas trip. We did a History of the Holocaust tour. We traveled to Poland and Germany and the Czech Republic and looked at that terrible legacy of the Holocaust, but also some of the heroic stories of people who really tried to make a difference in that difficult time period. After that, we then made a trip to Italy, where we were able to go to Rome, Florence, and Venice, and that's a must-see trip for any of you when you're looking to venture beyond our borders. It's a great place to go to and to see all the rich heritage of both the classical period, but also the medieval age and the Renaissance. The following year, after we went to Italy, we had another group of students. We made a trip to France, and we went to Paris and checked out the holdings in the Louvre Museum, but also, of course, all the shops and cafes and places to shop. And then we ended the trip by going to Normandy, where the Americans stormed the beachhead, and many of them lost their lives. And we visited the American cemetery, where over 9,000 American soldiers are buried, and that was an unforgettable experience for all of us. One of the highlights of that trip, we always have something that's kind of unexpected. And one of the highlights of that particular trip is at the American cemetery, they have a flag lowering ceremony every day. And they lower 2 flags on the site. That cemetery was actually deeded by the French to the Americans to honor America's sacrifice in World War II. And so in these flag lowering ceremonies, they were looking for some Americans who were there. They tried to find some servicemen and women if they have them on site, but in this case they asked us, is there anybody who would like to participate? We had one student whose grandfather flew as a pilot in World War II. We had another art professor whose dad was also a pilot, and he flew supply lines and dropped goods there in the World War II theater. And so both of them got to participate in the lowering of the flag there at the American cemetery. So a great highlight. And then also we've made a couple trips in recent years to the Lakota Sioux Reservation at Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And Pine Ridge, South Dakota is home to 2 of the poorest counties in the United States of America. On the quality of life index that you find that measures such things, it has some of the worst living conditions of any place in the Northern Hemisphere. The life expectancy is remarkably low. You have 80 to 90% unemployment. The teenage suicide rate is 6 times the national average. It's just a very, very bleak place with tremendous obstacles and difficulties, but also some wonderful stories of people who are making a difference. And so on these trips, we go and we learn from the Lakota Sioux people. We learn from their elders who will tell stories to our students and talk about life on the res, both the challenges but also the opportunities. We learn the history. We visit Wounded Knee Massacre site, the last place where the American government entered into forceful combat with the American Indians. And they used to call it the Wounded Knee Battle, but now they call it the Wounded Knee Massacre because it was not so much of a battle. We stay 6 miles from where that event took place, and then we go to the cemetery. We pay our respects. We hear stories from the Lakota people about what happened there in December of 1890. And while we're on site at Pine Ridge Reservation, we also get the wonderful privilege of doing some service projects. And so in recent years, We've built bunk beds for children. We've also built outhouses. Now that may surprise you in the modern world that there's still a need for people to have outhouses, but with the rise in utility bills and water bills, people can't afford to pay it, and so there's actually a spike, an increase in the number of people who are requesting a portable outhouse to be built and to be brought to their site. And so with a team of students in different university groups and churches around the country, we'll go for a week and we'll give our hands to whatever needs to be done that particular week. And so we've gone there twice. We're getting ready to make our third trip there. And then in just 2 short weeks, we set sail to Scotland, England, and Ireland. And a couple highlights await our group in a few short weeks. When we are in England, we will go to Windsor Castle, and with one of the psychology professors here, we have a contact with the superintendent of Windsor Castle, who is an assistant to the Queen, and he's going to give us some unofficial tour of the castle and the Queen's residence. And then also, when we are in Ireland, it just so happens it'll be St. Patrick's Day while we're there in Dublin. And so along with 500,000 other spectators, we will be celebrating all things Irish as we tour the city and see their rich heritage, but also their lively parade that honors St. Patrick's Day. Travel is important. I encourage everybody, as they have opportunity, to venture beyond their comfort zone, whether that's going into your own backyard or the neighbor down the street that you don't know, or some hidden jewel in your state or your county, or actually getting on a plane and hopping over the big pond. I encourage people to take that opportunity because there's so much to see in the world, and it can change a person's life. I like what Karen Armstrong says in her book, A Short History of Mythology. She says that each of us must go to a place where we've never gone, and we must do what we've never done before. And some of the greatest stories from antiquity are stories of people setting out on a journey, whether it's Homer's story of the Odyssey, or the biblical story of Abraham making a journey, or some of the modern day stories of Lewis and Clark and the opening of the American West, or maybe Jack Kerouac on the road, or perhaps William Least Moon, his book Blue Highways. All those stories capture something important about what it means to be human and what it means to live a life of discovery and journey. Thank you, and all the best.